go. Last time we were already at Newegg.com. We talked about serial ATA connections, and I said 6 would be nice, but if you can find, there are ones that have up to 10 serial ATA connections, and those are definitely intended for RAID setups. If you are setting up a server, okay, or even a computer that you need reliability, you need to keep the uptime up all the time, and you cannot afford to lose data, as casually as with a desktop computer. RAID is a good way to get into it. Even software RAID is a lot better than not having RAID at all. Many people will complain that RAID is not going to helpful. It's not very helpful, especially software RAID, because in the case of software RAID, if your operating system or your driver is broken, then you can potentially lose your data already. It does not depend on the hardware. Even the software component can cause data loss. But even that, I think, is better than having only one single drive, and that one single drive failure will cause you to lose your data. That is still better than having none. So look into RAID. If you don't want to spend too much money on like 3 hard drives, but only get a capacity of 2, you can always try out with 2 hard drives and use RAID 1 instead of RAID 0. Basically, this is what we call a mirror setup. One drive is exactly a mirror of the other drive. So it still gives you redundancy, and if you don't, how much is a hard drive these days? I mean, how much is a 2 terabyte hard drive? 100, 120-ish. I think it's, if you time it right and you go to Fry's, you can probably get a 2 terabyte hard drive for about $100. In other words, not too expensive. I don't think hard drives are very expensive anymore. And if you can settle for a smaller hard drive, like a 500 gig hard drive, they're what, $60, $70 these days. We'll get to the hard drives later today too, so we'll get to that part after we have selected our motherboard. Okay. One thing I do like about Newegg is you can just...
A wallet, maybe?
A wallet?
Yeah. I was
No one has brought to my attention yet.
Okay. I'll look at the in my backpack. Sorry, guys.
Okay. I hope you find it. Now, one thing I do like about Newegg is, it has a lot of reviews. Now, you can go to Amazon.com, look up any products, and get a lot of reviews as well. But the difference is the target audience. Amazon.com tend to have the general, buyer, the general public as, the people who write the comments. So occasionally you have, really good, complete reviews. But most of the time, you have like one-liners. I like this product. I do not like this product. This product sucks, okay? Or this product rocks. With Newegg, you have, these mostly people who are very technically oriented writing these reviews. And the funny part is they cannot wait to tell people how they set up their system, the rest of the system, not just the product they're reviewing. Now that, to me, is a very nice feature because not only can you see the review of a particular product, like a motherboard, but you can also see how experienced users set up their system. Because some people will say, I use this motherboard along with this processor. This is how I set up the processor. I overclock it by 25%. This is the heat sink that I use or the fan that I use to cool down the system. This is the case that I'm using, and so on and so forth. So if you have enough time to read all the comments and all the feedback from these end users, quote-unquote end users, you can actually learn quite a bit about not only the product that you're trying to buy, but also other stuff that go along with the product. Okay, so that's one thing that is really nice. And at this point, we have just talked about the number of serial ATA connections or SATA connections, and now you can look into some other aspects of what do you want on your processor. For instance, for CPU type, because I have already selected this is a socket 1156 motherboard, I can now select what type of processor I want to use on this motherboard. Most of these can use i7, i5, and i3 because all 3 models have versions that use this particular socket type. You can also look at the number of motherboards. See, most of the motherboards can deal with i7, i5, i3, and Pentium because one of the Pentium variety also has the same socket type. Okay. And last time I kind of asked you guys, if you have time, look into the reliability of these different brands of motherboards. And I have done some research a while back, and there's no clear winner. Okay, as far as I know, there's no particular manufacturer that is particularly good or have a good track record. If you go online and search for, let's say, gigabyte reliability, you will find people who will just say, yes, I will only buy gigabyte motherboards because they are solid, they're reliable. And then on the other hand, you will have people saying, no, I will never touch gigabyte motherboards again. So I think it does not have to do with the manufacturer, but also the model number. Are you buying a high-end motherboard or are you buying a low-end motherboard? With a high-end motherboard, you're paying a premium, and because of the premium you're paying, they can also put better components on the motherboard. When you buy a motherboard that is a value type of motherboard, the manufacturer is really pushed to reduce the cost of the motherboard. And so as a result, many times they will select less expensive components, and as a result, your motherboard may not be as reliable as one that is more expensive. So the best way is really just to look at the review of each motherboard and see how many people complain about reliability issues of that particular motherboard. You also have to put a grain of salt on these reviews because I believe that these manufacturers may have campaigns against each other, so they will write bad reviews about each other's product. So you can only see, you have to rule out the extreme good and the extreme bads. Okay, you kind of have to use your own judgment and gauge, okay, which one is more realistic. Okay, which one sounds more realistic. Are there any questions about motherboards at this point? Yes.
Over the past years, I've had best luck with ASUS and Gigabyte.
Okay. And I have had good luck with MSI even. I mean, MSI is not even a big brand. I mean, it's supposed to be a smaller brand, and it does not have a particularly good review. But I have had good luck with MSI motherboards. Some people say that Gigabyte is good. Gigabyte over here because Gigabyte had won a contract with Google, I believe. So Google is contracting out some of their hardware. Not motherboards per se, but server type of motherboards with Gigabyte. But just because they can manufacture reliable motherboards for Google does not mean that the ones that you buy from Fry's is going to be reliable either. Yep.
Doesn't it also depend on what you're using it for and what kind of conditions it's in? Because if you take say Gigabyte and put it in this really old case where it's all dusty and stuff like that, wouldn't it affect the performance? So it could be just the user. It would affect
the performance, but it would affect the performance regardless of which brand of a motherboard you put into that case.
Yeah. So would that be affecting some of the user feedbacks?
The reviews? Possibly. If you have a particular brand that is more popular to people who are more value oriented, then yes, it is more likely that you will get more negative reviews because they are selling more of the lower end products. So that's entirely possible. Yes. But before we go select based on manufacturer, there are other things you have to consider. I think last time we kind of went through every single one of these items already. The North Bridge is kind of an important item because the North Bridge controls which chipset you pick, controls or determines how quickly the processor can talk to your serial ATA bus and also some of the higher speed buses like PCI Express. Okay, there are two bridges, generally speaking. You have the processor here. The processor typically still has to talk to a chipset, and on the chipset you have the North Bridge and you have the South Bridge. This is the processor, the central processing unit. In the past, memory has to be interfaced through the North Bridge. Okay, but that's back in the good old days. In terms of Intel technology, that's back when they have 775 socket types. With the new Core I processors, that is no longer the case. The processor or the CPU actually talk to memory directly and bypassing the North Bridge altogether. But it does not mean the North Bridge is not useful anymore, because the North Bridge is still the component that will talk to your hard disk drives. It will still have to talk to your PCI Express cards, which is typically where your VGA card is attached to. If you don't use an external VGA card, then this will also be directly be interfacing to your graphics card. Okay, a part of the chipset, a part of the North Bridge, is your graphics card. Okay, the South Bridge, on the other hand, interfaces with slower components. Can someone name certain slower components compared to these, really high-speed components? Anything from the motherboard that you consider relatively low speed? How about audio stuff? Your sound card. Okay, your sound card is typically a feature of the South Bridge. In the past, some people or audiophiles would buy their own dedicated sound cards and put it into the case. That is no longer a popular approach because you still have a lot of electrical noise inside the case or inside the chassis of a computer. And as a result, you can buy a $300 sound card, and it will still pick up some buzz just because the rest of the system is generating the interference. So these days, people do not buy PCI Express audio cards and put it into the system, because it's just not worthwhile of doing. If you want some really high-end audio stuff, some people use USB bus. Okay, you can buy audio components as a USB bus component, and then you can use it externally. And because it is external to the system, it is also less likely to pick up any noise from the system itself. But typically, whatever comes with the motherboard is good enough for the most part. Other, low, quote-unquote, low-speed devices would be USB. I know for sure USB up to 2.0 is considered low-speed enough that it is going to be offered through the South Bridge. You have your Ethernet connectors, Ethernet NICs, network interface cards. That's also coming out from the South Bridge of a chipset. Okay. Are there any questions about what the chipset is about, and what is the North Bridge and what is the South Bridge? North Bridge for high-speed devices, South Bridge for slower and low-speed devices.
The CPU?
The CPU interfaces to the chipset, just like this. The CPU these days, with a Core I type, it has its own interface to memory. And that's why the pin number went all the way from 775 in the good old days, where memory is interfaced through the chipset, to 1,156 pins, because now the CPU interfaces directly to memory. Which is nice because now you don't have another bottleneck in the system. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, does that get any faster to connect that way than through the North Bridge?
It tends to go a little bit faster, because you don't have the North Bridge anymore. Besides, your Core I processor also has its own VGA or video card component. Most people do not use it, because if you want a higher performance system, the one that is included on the processor die is not, as good as an external graphics card. Okay. And you can see that there are definite popular choices, like the P43, 45, and 55 are popular choices, and these are less popular choices. I'm suspecting the H line, or the H series, is a higher performance type of chipset, whereas the P product line is a lower performance chipset. I don't know for sure. You guys have to kind of look it up and find out whether that is the case or not.